Welcome back from break, and I am absolutely honored to introduce our next speaker. Now, I don't know about you, but I am still recovering from this morning's setup. How many of you are glad you came today? I'm sure glad you came today. And I'm so glad that Dr. Shakti Butler said yes to Teresa's invitation to join us here today. We met Dr. Butler last year at the People's Gathering hosted by Pacific Lutheran University. I had to leave early that day for another meeting, but I understand that Teresa and several of the members who now serve on our DEI subcommittee met Dr. Butler, got her business card, and said, "We have got to have you here." And we thank you for saying yes. And just like Judge Whitener, I'm going to ask for you to please read Dr. Butler's bio for yourself, because she is going to need every minute that we've given her and possibly some of our lunchtime to download and impart into us the wisdom that she has. So please join me in welcoming Dr. Shakti Butler, a visionary filmmaker, transformative learning educator, wife, mother, grandmother, friend to all, a newfound friend to me, to the stage. Dr. Butler.
Hi, everybody. Ooh, there are a lot of people here. You know how when some folks come to the podium, they tell you how good you look? I mean it. You look good. We have an amazing host too, don't we? Yeah. When I met Teresa last year, and I told her this last night when we had the subcommittee dinner, I felt like I was meeting family. Now, I know there are all kinds of families in the world. I'm talking really good family. Family that you want to be a part of. And thank you, Teresa Powell, for being just an amazing human being and doing so much incredible work. And thank you to all of you for being part of doing incredible work. So I always start with something called conocimiento. Because for me, this is all about building community. And conocimiento comes from the farm workers union work, movement work, that said that we have to know each other's strengths. And my basic attitude when I talk to people is, this is an invitation for us to step into our greatness, for what it means to be amazing human beings. And so I tend to be a little bit bossy. At least that's what my kindergarten teacher said on my report card. She's bossy. And she really nailed that, but you don't have to do anything I say. But I do have a few requests. So I'd like you to put everything down if you have anything in your hands. Move your chair slightly back from the table. Sit up nice and straight so you make that space in between the vertebrae in your spine. And as if somebody were standing over you and gently pulling you up from the top of your head, underscore the word gently. And if you wish, you can close your eyes. And all we're going to do is breathe together and use our imagination. So if you have your phones, if you just put them down for just a minute. I should tell you, I also used to teach 9th grade. I see everything. I'd like you to just turn your attention to your breath. You are breathing, that's a good thing. And notice the rhythm of your breath. Your inhalation and your exhalation. It may be that one part of your breath is longer or shorter than the other. So notice that. And one part of your breath is warmer and the other part is cooler. So notice that. And as you're breathing, allow yourself to feel a sense of gratitude that you are breathing. You are here. So we're going to take a few deep breaths together. Hi, Barbie. A few deep breaths together. You'll exhale first. Breathe in deep. Hold it for a moment. And then just let go. Just relax. Do that 3 times at your own pace. So you're going to couple with your own internal wisdom, that part of you that has carried you through good times and hard times and everything in between. And try to imagine the presence of that wisdom inside you. And feel grateful for that as well. And ask yourself this question. When is a time that I have had to move through obstacles in order to be better? In order to grow? And pick one time that you can imagine. One short story, one flash of a memory, to recognize when you've had an opportunity like that. Maybe you can see the environment you were in. Maybe it's something that happened over a period of time. But in looking on the other side of going through something challenging, what did you learn about yourself? What is the quality that you have that makes you great? It could be your courage. It could be your kindness. It could be your love. It could be your curiosity. What is it about you, this one example of the many that there are, that allows you to recognize your own beauty, your own power, your own humanity? And if we had a lot of time, I would ask you to name the ways that you put this quality that you have into operation. And you could actually make that short list. If I watched you being fearless, what would you tell me about how you do that? So this is your own deep internal inquiry. So take a couple more normal breaths. And when you're ready, you can open your eyes. But make that transition gentle. Notice how you feel. What is it like to take an internal bath? And I'm going to give you literally 2 minutes, maybe a little less, to go around at the table you're sitting in and to name the qualities that you have. And when I raise my hand, please raise your hand and stop talking, okay? So go. Thank you for doing that. I want to say, if we shouted out some of the qualities that are here, I know there are many: humor, perseverance, accountability, persistence, courage, compassion, and so on. And if we knew how we put those into operation, we would be able to see how interconnected we are, because as you notice with these qualities, they're not in competition with one another, and we need them all. Is that not true? And so I want to thank you for this. It doesn't matter how much time I have to speak. I always do conocimiento because it's people first. It's community first. That is what we are learning to do. And oftentimes we find ourselves in places where we want things of the world, we want things outside of us, but we're not doing the fractal changes that we need to make in order to set the stage for that to happen. So for example, how many of you here have someone who you don't talk to anymore because they did you wrong? And you're right about that. And you could be right about that. But what does it mean to negotiate our differences? Each of us, every single one of us, every single day, in a way that allows us to practice our expectations of the world. So I'm going to show you a little short clip from our last movie called Healing Justice. And this particular film is about interrupting the youth to prison pipeline. And so, but it also offers a blessing. And so, enjoy.
Listen to my heart speak. It has a rhythm that reaches from the highest peaks of our ancestors. The words that talk of truth and wisdom, and that they love it when you miss them, but we're talking to them from jail cells in our prisons. Listen to my heart speak.
Walking on eggshells, looking for the door through this glass ceiling. My confidence keeps peeling, thinking year after year, I just want to be seen. As I walk around, I demand respect. So why do I feel so ghostly? Why do I feel so ghostly? Do you see me? Do you even see me? So why do I feel so ghostly? Why do I feel so ghostly? Do you see me? Do you even see me?
Like ticking time watches, slavery and back swatches, like maybe if we're quiet, no one will try to watch us. Closed mouths, barbed-wired hearts. Tough skin making it easier to create scars. Tough skin making it easier to create scars. Create scars.
Ugly, stupid, waste of life. Ugly, stupid, waste of life. Waste of life. Waste of life. Insults to yourself that make you want to forget your life. So the knife is the only thing that makes you feel right.
Colonization can be termed as historical trauma, intergenerational trauma. It's trauma after trauma happening over and over again, throughout the course of your life, and then it's been happening generation after generation before you. And so what happens is you end up with a lot of lateral violence, an expression of pain going out to people around you.
taste. We're going to come back to trauma. I think I made a presentation that's about 3 hours long, so I'm going to do the best that I can. But I feel like I can really welcome you now. We've done a little community work. We've looked a little bit about why it's so important for us to practice what we expect from other people in the world. And this is some of the content that I would like to share with you, which really came to me in the form of questions. These are the things that I'm curious about. I'm like a perpetual learner. I'm trying to understand this world with my finite mind, a world that is infinite and beyond my understanding at many different levels. But I want to talk to you a little bit about the problem of othering. My friend John Powell has a conference that if you're going to be in the Bay Area, I believe it's in April. I hosted it the first 2 times that it was offered. It's called Othering and Belonging. And the problem of the 21st century as a context for what we're doing is the problem of othering. We live in a world beset by seemingly intractable and overwhelming challenges, and virtually every global, national, and regional conflict is wrapped within or organized around one or more dimensions of group-based difference. Othering undergirds territorial disputes, sectarian violence, military conflict, the spread of disease, hunger, and food insecurity, and even climate change. Belonging means more than just being seen. Belonging means being able to participate in the design of political, social, and cultural structures. Belonging means the right to contribute and also make demands upon society and its institutions. Of all the forces shaping politics and power around the world, perhaps none are more important than our sense of who we are, both individually and collectively, and who we are becoming. We are in a period of accelerated change, at least in 4 areas: globalization, technology, the environment, and demographic change. As human beings and other species as well, we can only process so much change in a short period of time without experiencing anxiety. This is a normal biological reaction, but how we respond is greatly shaped through the stories and the structures presented by leadership and culture and those who are in power. So you can see from this chart that we either are able to look at what it means to be breaking apart or what it means for us to belong. Our response is greatly shaped through the stories and the understanding that we have about what creates structural imbalance in the world, but particularly I'm focusing, of course, on the United States, along with the narratives that accompany them. And we can see them solely as threats, but we can also see them as opportunities to grow, moving beyond the binary thinking of us and them. This, in many ways, is all about cultivating and practicing empathy, compassion, and belonging. It's all about learning how to treat ourselves and one another well. So I could have told you, for example, that I feel that the quality that I have that is totally a gift for me is the quality of love. And I could tell you how I put that into action, the way I listen, the way I make space for other people, the generosity that I have, the way that I can love you up and only met you 2 minutes ago. Right. So I can also tell you, however, that if you cut me off on the freeway at 7 o'clock in the morning, you're not going to get that love. You're going to get something completely different. Now, the value of that is I get to notice my internal work. What do I need to do to maintain my state of equanimity? What do I need to do? What are the practices? What are the ways that I support that for myself? It turns out that our brains are wired for connection. Cultivating empathy, compassion, and belonging relies on experiencing cultural relevancy. Cultural relevancy, whether consciously or unconsciously, we have a hard time with that. Cultural relevance is the catalyst that activates the wiring of neural connectivity in the brain. This is how the brain functions. It also optimizes learning. For those of you who are familiar with Zaretta Hammond's work on culturally responsive teaching, we understand that if you are working with anybody, but particularly within the educational system, if what you are presenting is not culturally relevant to your students, they will not get what you're talking about. Culture is extremely important. It is the motivation for pro-social behavior, cooperation, and communication, which are all important survival skills for many species. You do get thirsty when you're up here. I always worry because I'm such a loud swallower. But anyway, when I was thinking about this, I was thinking about my trip to South Africa and the kinds of informations we get when we travel to other parts of the country or the world. And we were told, don't talk to strangers. Don't stop and talk to strangers because they may not have your best interest at heart. Well, first of all, if you go to South Africa, you know you drive on the opposite side of the car. And so we left the airport. I was with two of my friends, and we got lost. And I wanted to roll down the window and ask somebody for directions. And one of my friends said, no, we can't do that, we can't do that, we can't do that. And so I didn't. I had to go all the way back to the airport and start over again because she was so afraid of the people. Bad things happen everywhere, but we can't do our being the best we can be motivated by fear. So I want to talk to you about a number of things that really have to do also with language, and the language that we can't use because it might be offensive, but it prevents us from really discussing the issues at hand. But before I do that, before we launch into what a systems analysis is and why it's so important, I want to refer us to Bell Hooks. You recognize her here? Bell Hooks said, I'm very interested in what it means for us to cultivate together a community that allows for risk. The risk of knowing someone outside your own boundaries. The risk that is love. There is no love that does not involve risk. Isn't that true? So I'm going to ask us, in holding deep love and respect for Bell Hooks, that we go about creating a brave space, not a safe space. A safe space means nobody gets their feathers ruffled. Nobody gets upset. And of course, we all have our triggers, right? We all have things that make us afraid or crazy or whatever the case might be. But it's important to take that risk. Why? Because how else are we going to grow? So I'm going to start this with a little story. Some years ago, there was a big problem at the Jefferson Memorial in Washington, D.C. And simply put, birds in huge numbers were pooping all over the memorial. Now, this made visiting the place a bit uncomfortable. And there were a lot of attempts to remedy this situation, which caused even bigger problems since the harsh cleaning chemicals were really ruining the memorial. Fortunately, some of the national park managers assigned to the case began asking why. Why was the Jefferson Memorial so much more of a target for birds than any of the other memorials? And a little bit of investigation revealed the following. The birds were attracted to the Jefferson Memorial because of the abundance of spiders. Spiders, as you probably know, are gourmet treats for birds. And the spiders were attracted to the insects called midges that were nesting there. And the midges were attracted to the memorial because of the light. It turns out that midges like to procreate in places where the light is just so. And it creates this sort of mood for, you get the idea. So the spiders were attracted to the midges, the birds were attracted to the spiders, and the national park workers thought that, well, they're not really, the whole poop thing is just a byproduct of all of that. And so after reviewing this curious chain of events that led to the problem, decision was made to wait until dark to turn on the lights, rather than an hour before it turned dark. So this 1 hour delay was enough to ruin the mood lighting for the midges, who then decided to have midge sex somewhere else. No midges, no spiders, no birds, no poop. No need to clean the Jefferson Memorial so often. Case closed, right? So we can look at an example like that and understand the importance of asking why. And really that is what we're going to be doing. Why? I always wondered when I was a kid, why are people of color treated the way they are treated in this country? I was 10 years old when I saw the picture of Emmett Till. I remember screaming to this day. I literally fell to my knees. I could not understand this level of inhumanity. So you may be reading the slide that's up, and I tend not to read slides, so you can see all the things in the column on the left that were started, and the 5 whys techniques, which is the important part. We name a problem that we're having. We ask why it's happening. We get an answer, then why about that? And then get another answer or more answers, and then ask why about that, and so on, many times. So the rest of what I'm talking to you about is why about that. Before we go into systems analysis, just take a moment and look at this. It says that we have to understand systems at 3 different levels, which is not what we do when we live in a country where the dominant culture is highly individualistic. So we understand, for example, that if you lose your credit card, that is an individual experience. If somebody stole your credit card, you are now in relationship with someone else who you will probably not know, or maybe you know the person who took your credit card. But at the structural level, being charged high interest unfairly on credit card debt is something that is a structural problem. Do you get the difference? So this is an easy way, because I'm talking to you not as if you probably don't know most of the things I'm going to say, but it's a way for you to be able to explain it to others. Because people get systems and structures confused. So this is the first frame, the first systemic frame. I use this all the time. It comes from our film, Cracking the Codes, which explains all of this stuff quite beautifully so that you don't have to. But I really want to pay attention to history, because history is something we do not really learn. We got a lesson in history just earlier this morning about the power of policy and law. And some of that was new information for some of us. But it makes such a big difference in terms of how the waters are charted. It also makes a big difference to understand why it's so important to look at the margins. Who lives on the margins? Because people who live on the margins of society have a lot to teach us. So history and understanding history, which I'm gonna back into in a moment, is extremely important, because history informs culture. And I just talked to you about culture and what it means to understand the power of culture. And what does it mean for all of you to be engaging in cultural change? What does that actually mean? It's the culture that then tells you who you are. Culture informs who you are. And it's all moved by power and economics. We have the internal components and the external components, bias, privilege, internalized racism. You know what these things mean. But they play out in our interpersonal relationships, in our institutional relationships, in our structural relationships. If we don't understand the multi-layered activities that are all happening at the same time, which you can see in almost any story, some are visible, some are more hidden. If you're not asking questions about how these different elements are showing up in the narrative, you cannot possibly analyze it. You can't analyze it, you can't do anything about it. And if it becomes all about you, oh, are you calling me a racist? We don't even have a common definition of what that actually means. We're still thinking about people who are wearing hoods and doing all kinds of bad things. And we can have racist policies and laws with no racist actors. And if we don't understand that and we can't see that, then how do we deal with it? So it's really important to understand systems and how systems function. Every system has a job. Your human system has a job. It's to keep you alive. And the system of inequity has a job, and it's to create an equity. And these systems work really well without any interference from you, which is why we must interfere. So the system of inequity and the structures of the system, when we talk about structures within the system of inequity, we're actually talking about how institutions across the board help create the same outcomes. We look at the impact of inequity in society, and we can see that it's happening. And you can tell if you can see the little icons that are on this chart. You know, we're talking about education and banking and the legal system and the media and global impacts and housing and medical, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. These are the institutions that are, in fact, what must be explored, bless you, what must be explored in order to be able to know what it is we can do. Now, I want to say one thing about doing, just in case I don't get to finish my presentation. We go to school and we are trained to do what? How do you prove that you're a good student? Answers. You get the right answers. Now I want you to think about a lot of the conversations you have with people where there may be some disagreement, or not even necessarily disagreement outright, but just a difference of opinion. The way that we approach that is to tell people how they have it wrong. Now, I don't know about you, but when I feel like somebody's telling me how I have it wrong, I'm doing this kind of thing. I'm backing up. Because I don't want to hear what you have to say, because I know I'm right. And how many of us like to really undergo the impact of criticism? We're defending why we're doing what we're doing. We're talking about why we're right. And so I'm going to give you something that I really would like you to write down, because I don't have time to go through this with you today. But you could look up an article called Strategic Questioning. Strategic Questioning by Fran Peavy, P-E-A-V-Y. Now, it looks on the surface like a very simple thing, but it is a skill, it is a tool that will allow you to invite other people to think out loud, and for you to occupy the space of being deeply curious about what other people are thinking, because we think we know. We don't. We don't really know why people are. I don't even know myself. I don't know about you. I'm working on it. But there are a lot of things about myself that require deep inquiry. So now I want to get to another frame. This is the harder one. So we can't use the word race or racism, really. And we can't use the word supremacy, because supremacy implies something that has to do with you. But like the system of inequity, the system has a job. And that system, we could all be, you know this, we could all be the nicest people in the world, and it will not stop inequity. It has nothing to do with how nice of a person, I mean, it's good if you're nice, if you're kind, if you do all of these things that make you human. But that in and of itself is not going to solve anything, right? So we have to understand what supremacy means. And supremacy is directly related to colonialism. So who came here? Let's go back to history. Who came to this country? Who participated in the triangle trade? Not you. You didn't create the system. You didn't create the history. But we're all part of the system. And we have to understand what supremacy actually means. So since it's not about you, and since people during the Middle Ages lived in a world where there was a tremendous amount of violence, public torture, this is history, I'm not making this up, we become, based upon the culture we lived in, who we are. So if you think of something like lynching, for example, and you remove the black bodies from the picture, or the native bodies, or the physically disabled, quote unquote, bodies, because these are all people who were lynched, and you look at the people who are there for sport, which is how lynchings actually happened, this is not new behavior. This is patterned behavior. And who suffers? The people who are at the end of the rope and the people who are losing their souls. Children. Children being taught. So I don't want to belabor this because, of course, it's not comfortable. But we have to understand that in order to devalue another human being, you must be superior to them. That was laid out for us very clearly this morning. You must feel a sense of your extended value and the deprivation of value for other human beings. They are not as good as you are. This gets drilled into our unconscious minds. And they are patterns that happen over hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of years. So where does supremacy play out? Well, there's white supremacy, there's male supremacy, there's patriarchy, there's even human supremacy, because we think we can do things to the earth that don't matter. We can do things to children that don't matter. But the power and economics of this is the requisition of cheap labor. We need cheap labor in order to make this work. And that plays out in genocide. It plays out in the invisible ways that labor and people and their value are not as important as others. It plays out in ecocide. It plays out in the exploitation of resources. Now, this particular chart was created by Dr. Marya. She's a doctor, and so she really understands trauma and the inflammation. So this is both a literal word and a figurative word. That trauma is what happens to bodies. Our minds, our cognitive minds, is not what deals with trauma. It is not what heals the body. Conversation will only take us so far. But if we can't use language that actually describes what's going on because people are getting offended, then how on earth do we talk about this in code? We tiptoe around it. And I'm saying, brave people, Us who understand the importance of diversity, equity, and inclusion to build a world where everybody feels like they belong, where they have a voice, requires our ability to analyze and to talk and to heal the body. I'm sure that some of you know who Robin DiAngelo is because I don't know if she's from Seattle, but she's lived here for a long time. And she wrote a book called White Fragility, which has been on the New York Times bestseller list for quite some time. And what she says is that this fragility makes it hard for us to talk about what really is. And she really breaks it down in the book. In fact, one of the examples in the book, how many of you saw the movie 42? About Jackie Robinson, the first black Negro baseball player. So when you think about Jackie Robinson, you think about all these amazing qualities he had, and that he was selected not just because he was a fantastic baseball player, but because he would not react to how he was being treated all over the country. And so we get the story of a modern hero. That is a diversion. Yes, he was a modern hero. We have personal ways that we stand up and we are great. We step into that greatness I'm talking about. But the movie does not talk about why the decision was made to have Negro baseball players integrate into the sport. Why did that happen? Why was it of benefit to bring in Negro baseball players? This is an institutional decision, and it's all about the money. That would not have happened if there was not money to be made. And so we are constantly diverted away from institutional and structural analysis, and we look at individual analysis. It is a blind spot. We cannot see what's going on. So we have a Congress that's 90% white, governors 96% white, top military advisors 100% white, president and vice president 100% white, current POTUS cabinet 91% white. People who decide which TV shows and media is a huge part of culture, decided by people who are 93% white. People who decide what books we read, publishers, 90% white. People who decide which news is covered, 85% white. People who decide which music is produced, 95% white. Teachers, 83% white. Full-time college professors, 84% white. Owners of men's pro football teams, 97% white. There's something wrong here. You're not doing this. We do vote, but we could have a whole conversation about that. So these numbers are not a matter of good people versus bad people. They are a matter of power, control, and dominance by a racial group with a particular self-image, worldview, supremacy, and sets interests in the position to disseminate that image and worldview and to protect those interests across the entire society. So we have a lot of work to do. But it begins with us being able to explain these things in some ways by using strategic questioning to understand why things are the way they are. The brain, trauma, and healing. For those of you who are interested in addressing trauma, we could look at intergenerational trauma, we could look at epigenetics. We can look at what Dr. George Grew calls post-traumatic slave syndrome, but there are post-traumatic stress syndromes. We think of people who've been in the war as falling into that category, and how we actually address this. I'm going to talk to you first by telling you this short story about a book by Resmaa, blanking on his last name, Menachem, who wrote a book called My Grandmother's Hands. Here he is right here. I'll show him to you first. And Resmaa is a specialist in somatics. He's been on every show that you can imagine, including Oprah Winfrey. And I mean, he's brilliant at what he talks about. But he starts his book, which, by the way, if you don't have this book, My Grandmother's Hands, and you're interested in healing, this is absolutely mandatory. It is a game changer in terms of looking at trauma. And why do we have to look at trauma? Because people from Europe came here traumatized. They were fleeing from Europe or kicked out of Europe, and they brought what they knew to this country. Do we understand that this is not personal? If you look at the papal bulls, for example, in history, 15th century, the 3 edicts, which were in place until the 1800s, basically said the king and the queen forever, people we can dominate who are not Christian forever, the land that does not really belong to us, but we can take it because they are heathens, forever. This is culture, deeply embedded in the culture. And Resmaa talks about his grandma, who one day he said to her, "Grandma, why are your hands so rough?" And she said, "Well, you know, I started picking cotton when I was a child." "Well, Grandma, why are your feet so rough?" "I didn't have shoes while I was picking cotton." But Grandma would rock in her rocking chair. She would rock. And sometimes she would hold her grandchildren, and she would rock. And this is healing, and I'm going to explain to you why in a minute. Let's see. I'm looking at the time. It's almost 20 to 12. How much more time do I have? 20 minutes? I'm doing good. I'm doing good. I'm not, all right. Because I was trying to figure out in my head, okay, what am I going to cut out? So Resmaa, who is really a delightful person, and you can look up YouTubes of him also. He says that the body is the way that we heal. I mentioned this to you already. We can all create more room and more opportunities for growth because it's the nervous system that is attacked, and when it's attacked, it creates trauma that lives in our bodies and that we pass on generation after generation. So this book is actually a call to action for us to recognize that racism is not about the head. We talk about it like it's about the head, but it's about the body. And we have to introduce an alternative view of what we can do to grow beyond the entrenched racialization that divides us in order to pave a way for the new body-centered understanding of white supremacy. So Resmaa talks about white body trauma, black and brown and red body trauma, and blue body trauma related to the police, because you know the first police were the slave catchers, and also who looked at Native American challenges. I mean, the police were about protecting property because it's about power and money and access. And so that's the role of the police and the way they're trained. Now, Resmaa's brother is a police officer, and he talks about the way police are trained. They must be desensitized to the brutality around them. This creates trauma. So that these responses to the people who they're taught to fear in particular neighborhoods or under certain circumstances bring about responses that do not go through the cognitive mind. It is processed by the reptilian part of the brain. The reptilian part of the brain is all about protection of the body. It is the gatekeeper for using the higher way of thinking. And we have responses to this trauma. So there's a healing here that needs to happen that we never talk about, that we don't really understand. And we're not going to solve this if we can't actually deal with the fact that white supremacy is not rational. We don't end up with it in our intellect alone. White supremacy is internalized deeply into our bodies. And we can refer to it as white body supremacy, or in the book, as he says, black body supremacy, and so on and so forth for people of color, and blue body supremacy, to go to the depth of where it is stored within our collective bones, muscles, and tissues. Are you hearing what I'm saying to you? So you can think of the times when you're triggered about a topic as a sign. You're triggered for a reason. You're triggered by a sign that lets you know there is some work that needs to be done. And there are a lot of exercises in this book. I want to tell you a very quick story. When I first started reading Resma's book, I was like, oh my God, the Holy Grail. It made so many things go click, 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 and make sense into my way of being. And I was teaching a class for about 150 people. And there was a black woman in the class who was very angry. And towards the end of the class, I took the last half an hour to actually do some basic exercises around soothing the body, which I'm going to get into in just a minute. When the class was over, I heard this shrieking in the corner. And it was this black woman and this white man hugging. What did we do? We rocked in the class. And we hummed. Everything changed. And these two people who had been having an argument, a disagreement with one another, had some healing for 5 minutes of rocking and humming. Something that had been a barrier to their communication for months. That did it for me. I'm like, I need to learn everything I can about this. We know that we have to understand something about the brain, that the brain, or the reptilian brain, which I was referring to, is the oldest and smallest region of the 3 areas of the brain. It resides in the brainstem. It evolved hundreds of millions of years ago and is more like the entire brain of the present-day reptiles. It controls the bodies, what functions in terms of heart rate, breathing, body temperature, and balance. Do you ever notice that when you get upset, you hold your breath? It's because you feel threatened. That's what the reptilian brain does. We'll go into more of that in a moment. This is part of the brain that only responds to issues of survival and protection. And we know what those are, don't we? This way that the body responds is an intelligent and instinctual strategy to combat a stressful experience. We have fight, we have freeze, we have flight, we have submit, and we have disassociation. This is the way it works. But I want to talk to you about the thing that I found really exciting in this book, which is something called the vagus nerve, or the soul nerve, that most of us have never heard about it. The soul nerve is an interesting term to use for it because the soul nerve, or the vagus nerve, is a unifying organ of your entire nervous system. So new advances in psychology reveal that our deepest emotions, love, fear, anger, dread, grief, sorrow, disgust, and so on, as well as love, hope, and so on, that these structures are a complex system of nerves that connect the brainstem, the pharynx, the heart, the lungs, the stomach, the gut, and the spine. Neuroscientists call this system the wandering nerve, or the vagus nerve. A more apt name might be our soul nerve, which is how Resma refers to it. The soul nerve is connected directly to a part of the brain that doesn't use cognition. So now I'll explain to you how and why the reptilian brain, part of the brain, works the way it does. Our soul nerve also helps mediate between our bodies, activating energy and resting energy. And this part of our brain is similar to the brain, again, of lower animals. This trauma always does happen in the body. It doesn't happen anywhere else. And to stop or thwart further potential damage, this mechanism, which includes this vagus nerve, is put into play. So I love Brother Ta-Nehisi Coates. Between the world and me, he said it this way. But for all our phrasing, race relations, racial chasm, racial justice, racial profiling, white privilege, even white supremacy serves to obscure that racism is a visceral experience, that it dislodges brains, blocks airways, rips muscles, extracts organs, cracks bones, breaks teeth. You must always remember that the sociology, the history, the economics, the graphs, the charts, the regressions, all land with great violence upon the body. Let me say this to you another way. We are all suffering because of racialization. We are all suffering because of oppression. It may not be that easy to see or understand, but healing is necessary for all of us. So now I'm up to my last section. I had 4 questions. Radical imagination. Radical imagination. So oftentimes when I'm showing a film or something like that, and I'm talking to people like you who are deeply invested in change and making change, which is the hardest thing we human beings can do, I'll say something like, let's assume for a moment that all of your good work, your collective efforts, it's working. It's working. It's actually taking place. How would you know? What is one thing that could jump into your mind right now that you would say, in this particular institution that is a part of the larger structure, change is happening because what? What has become incorporated into the culture? Because if we don't incorporate it into the culture, it's transitional. Because as leadership changes, we can go back very easily. That pressure is happening right now in the country. We still fight in the Civil War. And so if we can't look at this and understand it, if we can't use the language, if we don't understand how the body responds, we get stuck and we look for the answers rather than better questions. So what will the future of belonging look like? Radical imagination is where we have to go. We have to build a bridge from where we are to where we want to go. Read the article, Strategic Questioning. It will really support you in that understanding. Who is this? Einstein. So what he said is that the human being is part of the whole called by us the universe, a part limited in time and space. He experiences his thoughts and feelings as separate from the rest. We think we're individuals having individual experiences, right? But it's kind of an optical delusion of our consciousness. This delusion is a prison for us, restricting us to our personal desires and to affection for a few persons who interest us. Our task must be to free ourselves from this prison by widening our compassion to embrace all living creatures and the whole of nature and its beauty. I use Einstein because most people know who he is. He wasn't no dummy. This is a brilliant man. But he was brilliant in part because of the questions that he asked. When he was 15, which is the beginning of radical imagination, if we're not asking questions, we can't get to radical imagination. That he always had these amazing questions. But a big question for him when he was either 15 or 16 was, what would I see if I were able to travel on my bicycle at the speed of light? Check that question out. I mean, I'm like, I want to be brilliant like that, to think of questions like that. It's not the way my brain operates, but I'm glad it did for him. But that question led to 10 years of inquiry, asking question after question after question, the result of which came in his first writings on relativity, one of the two pillars of modern day physics. Art. Art is all about imagination. This particular piece of art, called The Sugar Sphinx by Kara Walker, is so deep because she built this in a warehouse in Brooklyn where slave children and slave children were working, making sugar and maple syrup. In fact, there was so much of that happening that maple syrup is still in the walls. I think the building was being torn down. It may have been by now, but at the time that she built this, which is where this Sphinx is lodged. She uses art to ask questions. She uses art to help people explore history. And in the 250 years that this building was there with this work going on, people weren't asking questions. They weren't asking questions about children. And by the way, how are the children? You know, the Maasai warriors, the great warriors of East Africa, known for their power, strength, vigilance. When they come home from having been in battle, they ask the question, and how are the children? Because any society worth its salt understands the preciousness of the children. What about the children at the border? We're gonna wait till they're free? What can we do to honor life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness? We have a lot of work to do. This is Hank Willis Thomas. This is called The Cotton Bowl. And it looks at some of the connections between history and where we are now. We're not talking about how much money they make or any of that kind of stuff. We're talking about something else. It comes from a series that he created called Strange Fruit. And it makes this legal history legible through this American practice or sport that we call football. It's designed to have us ask questions. So what kind of questions are you asking? I gotta go get my questions sometimes from other people. That's okay. But if we're not asking questions and we're just figuring out what to do, we're missing part of what's calling us to make a future of belonging. These are real. Blue strawberries. You cut them open, they're red on the inside. They exist because somebody was playing, or bodies were playing in the lab to create this phenomenon called blue strawberries that are supposed to be filled with a lot more vitamins and so on and so forth. But somebody had an idea. Einstein had questions. Does anybody know what this is, these cars are? These are electric cars, Teslas. I went to Massachusetts last week and I got to ride in my first Tesla. I loved it. It's electrical, all electrical, very few parts. It drives like a dream. It goes really fast. I like speed, so, you know. It drives really fast, but somebody had to say it's possible for us to create a mode of transportation that doesn't use oil or gasoline. And now I could start talking to you about double loop theory, but that's a whole other conversation. About what does it mean for us to create a future that honors the earth that we're on. We do have social imagination, the capacity to invent visions of what should be and what might be in our deficient society, on the streets where we live, in our schools. And Maxine Greene says that when she writes about social imagination, she's reminded of Jean-Paul Sartre's declaration that, quote, "It is on the day that we can conceive of a different state of affairs that a new light falls on our troubles and our suffering, and that we decide that these are unbearable, and I would add, and we do something about it. We think outside the box. This is one of my favorite authors, Arundhati Roy. And if we had time, I would have you stand up and read this out loud several times. To love, to be loved, to never forget your own insignificance within the wider scheme of things, of course. To never get used to the unspeakable violence and the vulgar disparity of life around you. To seek joy in the saddest places. To pursue beauty to its lair. To never simplify what is complicated or complicate what is simple. To respect strength, never power. And above all, to watch. To try and understand. To never look away. And to never, never forget. This is our mandate. Diversity, equity, inclusion requires that we learn, that we grow, that we ask questions, that we understand how the body is important and what it means to take care of the body and what it means to take care of ourselves and each other, what it means to look beyond our own highly individualized experience and the few people in our lives who matter to us, to understand that we are completely interdependent from the moment we open our eyes in the morning until we go to bed at night, and even while we're sleeping. The world and the people in it are working on our behalf, but not everybody's. So I want to close the way that I started. This is a closing from the film Healing Justice. And, uh-oh, I don't hear any sound. Oh, here we go.
Love is really interconnectedness. Love really is that healing. But it's not this, symbolic word. It's love is work. Love is sacrifice. Love is truth. Love is your ability to really look at what is real and then make a commitment to make it more pure, make it more sacred. That's the true work. That's the true social justice work.
So thank you very much, everybody. I'm so glad that I've had an opportunity to share with you some of the things that I think about, that my colleagues think about, that I know you're thinking about, like how do we really make this happen? And what role do I play? And how am I of service? And replacing that, of course, or I should say adding on to it. How do we do this together? We need each other to make the world survive and thrive. So thank you so much. I really appreciate being here.
Truth, healing, and reconciliation. And what you did for us this morning is spoke truth. That you didn't have any input in your earth suit, as lovely as it is. And I had certainly no input into mine, although I probably would have chosen to be a lovely, tall, beautiful African queen had I been asked. But nobody asked me. And how could we even think that we would be better than any human being based on the amount or lack of melanin that we have in our body? And that all of this is really about greed, power, and control. And you've given us truth so that now we could go on to healing, so that we could move into reconciliation. And I thank you for framing it that way, giving us language to have this conversation, because we do have a lot of work to do. And because of you, our radical imagination and question is, what did you say Einstein said? What would I see if I traveled at the speed of light on my bike? So what would we see, Washington State, if we traveled at the speed of love in our heart? Thank you for our gift. It's heavy, because you're heavy. You're weighty. On behalf of the state of employees, the Washington State employees, and our governor who signed it, so Teresa don't have to yell it out to me again this time. We want to honor you for our being and blessing us here at our first annual statewide Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Summit. Please hang this on your wall of fame, and we will be watching Healing Justice. You'll get us those copies, and thank you very much. And we have some for sale at the people. We have some for sale to the people. Okay. Thank you so much, Dr. Butler. Thank you so much. We'll get this. Again, no. So we must be approaching lunch. Is it lunchtime? And so that means that I'm going to see you back here at I'm going to see them back here. I'm going to see them again at 4. And so after lunch, you're going to go to your breakout sessions at 1 o'clock, and all that's in your maps. If you're going to do the parking thing, remember AA, if you go to the parking kiosk so you can get the fare. Lunch is going to be served here in this room. So have a great afternoon. Look forward to seeing you at 4. Thanks for coming.